to have you here, and
Thanks.
welcome to Business 201 and NextUp.
Thanks.
Maybe you can just provide a little bit of an overview of Insight marketing. So what, how did you come to Insight, and what maybe your some of the things that the firm is dealing with?
Sure, yeah. So Insight Marketing is, we're a relationship-driven marketing firm. So what that means is we really focus on what it takes to build relationships in marketing rather than sort of the traditional agency mass advertising approach to things. So within that context, we focus a lot in business-to-business marketing. We also do a lot of work in the nonprofit sector as well. So it's a pretty broad base, but our real philosophy is that it's really understanding the networks that influence people's buying behaviors and how you can then access those networks to make the right referrals and right connections.
So your background is one where you had significant time in terms of working with the nonprofit.
Yeah.
How has that provided an your skill set for where you currently are?
Well, it's interesting. So I used to do a lot of fundraising in the nonprofit sector, and of course, fundraising is really about relationships. It's that personal connection, how you bring somebody closer to an organization, bring them closer to a cause, and build those relationships. And so the philosophy in marketing that we use versus sort of a traditional fundraising sense is quite the same. And so that was sort of the natural fit. When they came to me and said, hey, you should come and join Insight, I thought, they're doing something a little bit different there. So that was sort of the common philosophy around it. The difference being now is that I get to work with a variety of nonprofits, whereas before I only got to work with one.
Is there a lot of different skill sets needed when working? The one thing about nonprofits is probably resources that they have are limited, and you need to ensure that their message is right on, and for the amount, what they're trying to get out of it for the amount that they have.
Absolutely.
So how do you work with them and ensure that their message is getting out?
It's really a lot of nonprofits. What they struggle with is that they have a mandate to the community. They need everybody to know about what they're doing because what they do is truly great, and that's a noble mission. But they're not Coke. They don't have billion-dollar advertising budgets. So it's really helping them to kind of understand who are the people who are best suited to be their ambassadors, and what is the right message that they need to go out and tell their story. So whether that's the board, whether that's their staff, whether it's their donors and their funders, but making sure that there's a consistent message across all of those stakeholder groups so that everybody's sort of talking from the same song sheet. We do a lot of work with nonprofits about that. We really start from what is their position in the marketplace. Because some nonprofits are in competitions with other nonprofits, but at the end of the day, every nonprofit is in competition with every nonprofit for public attention and ultimately dollars. So understanding what you can convey and what your position and what your differentiated value is in the market is really key, especially when you're trying to win over hearts and minds.
And when you use the term collateral, what does that mean? Is it a marketing term, or
So I'm just doing a proposal right now for some collateral, so it's in my head. Collateral, brochures, letters that you write, advertising that you do, anything that really sort of you're using as pieces to convey your message or your story. You want to make sure they're all consistent and saying the same, conveying the same message over and over.
So is marketing something that you think back to your undergrad days? Is that something that you aspired to, or how did you get into what was your career path to marketing?
Just going through university as sort of, as a lot of cases with a lot of university students is they take a track for something, and then 5 years later they look back and they're not doing what they thought they're going to be doing. That's kind of where I came from. I got involved in working in the arts sector while I was in university, and so even though I love geography, I love, even to this day, going to cities and exploring and that type of thing. But I got involved in sort of arts administration, and at the core of arts administration is you're selling product, you're selling tickets, you're selling sponsorships, you're trying to get philanthropic donations. So I really kind of got into that relationship world. And it really started with a lot of some of the charitable work I did in university. I got involved with Shinorama, which I know still has some legs out here in Alberta, and kind of sucked me in. And so the nonprofit sector was something that really kind of drew me. And it was that relationship piece. It was that sort of that ability to tell stories and to connect with people over really interesting stories that kind of got me going in that route. So it was not a linear path to what I'm doing now, for sure.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting because then if students check out your LinkedIn profile, one of the first things you say is that it's hard to connect via social media in a way, but to have a conversation and you have a cup of coffee with somebody. Is that it really speaks to the value of that relationship?
Absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, it's what people understand of you and what you have to present, or what your company is trying to say and trying to present, or what your nonprofit is trying to say and trying to present. That's really valuable, and I think LinkedIn's great for making connections, but until you actually connect with the individual and have to have a conversation with them, it's kind of like looking at a billboard ad for a cell phone and saying, should I buy the cell phone? Or talking to your friend and saying, yeah, you got a great cell phone, what is it? Tell me about it. And then that's really when you would start to kind of understand a product or a person, is really through those individual connections and having those chances to meet and share ideas and talk.
In terms of some of the things that you find make you more effective in your current position, what would the top 3 be in terms of, the relationship building would be one, because you're dealing with business to business, and that's I would think a smaller subset, but what would be the other major things that make you successful as an individual?
So the relationship, that attentiveness to relationships, I think is something that's been really key. I can trace back 6 or 7 relationships throughout my life that have got me to this point today. And so tracking those and remembering those is really key. One of the things that's been really effective for me is I have a fairly strategic mind, so my work has always been more on the strategy side. Insight, as an example, we firmly believe that a good marketing campaign, a good relationship building campaign, a good fundraising campaign is born out of strategy. What is that common launching off point that you're going to do something so that you're doing it with the least amount of resources, the least amount of effort to get the best bang for your buck? And that's not just by kind of throwing it all out there and hoping it's going to happen. So for me, having a fairly strategic mind and kind of saying, what is the outcome of this decision? What's step 2 or 3 down the road has been really key. And I think the third piece has just been really, if you look at my LinkedIn profile, I've been all over the place. So having an open mind has been really key for me. I've lived in 4 different provinces. I've lived all over the country. I've worked in various sectors, and I've loved aspects of every piece of it, and that sort of has been the culmination of who I am today.
Right. Okay. When you talked about the relationships and those important people in your past, how do you keep the connections alive? Like, with somebody that you might have met 10 years ago, but was foundational to where you are today.
How do you keep those alive? That's a good question. I try to make time whenever I can, whether that's email, text, phone, social media. Those things all work for sure. But if I'm going back out to New Brunswick for a friend's wedding, I will carve out enough time so that I can go to Nova Scotia and see some friends and really sort of make the best use of my time when I do that. So that's been really key for me is making sure that I can find those times to again connect, and there's no replacement for a good sit down and have a pint with a friend and get caught up, even if it's been 3 or 4 or 5 years.
We have a question from one of our students. So you're involved with the Fringe right now?
Yep.
And so what type of difficulties do you face while organizing big events such as the Fringe Festival?
This is the 35th anniversary this year, so I'm the chair of the board. Our board is a volunteer board. The Fringe is a nonprofit organization. It's a big animal, lots of stakeholders, everything from your neighbors to the business association to sponsors to donors to artists that come from all over the world to patrons who come from all over the world. So there's lots of things to sort of keep juggling. Our priority is to make sure that we have a really solid staff. So we have 14 full-time staff, and they're the ones that do the yeoman's work.
Right.
So from a board perspective, we're always looking at things like, can we pay the bills? Do we have the right people in place for the certain jobs that we need? Do we have the right people to open up doors to potential sponsors or to potential donors? A lot of those things, looking at risk. It's an El Nino this year, so is it going to be a rainy summer? How does that affect how we do some of our programming outside and all that? So those are some of the things that we're kind of always dealing with. But it's a big moving animal at the end of the day. We have over 200 performances, 200 shows, 1,500 performances, 700,000 people come down to Strathcona over 10 days. It's a lot of fun. There's a lot of work to get there.
Right. So how did you get involved with it? What were the things that motivated you to get onto the board?
So like most things, I'm sure you've all experienced this in your lives, but somebody asks you. It tends to be how it goes. You don't ask, you don't get. But the Fringe was actually one of my first experiences when I moved to Edmonton almost 12 years ago now. I'd heard about this thing called the Fringe Festival when I was living in New Brunswick at the time, and my friends in the theater industry were sort of saying, "Oh, you're going out to kind of like the mecca for independent theater," and so I kind of knew what it was, but it was until I sort of got here and I realized, wait a second, there's something pretty magical about this. So I've always been a big fan of the Fringe, and then about 4 or 5 years ago, an opportunity came up to join the board, and
so were you volunteering at various, as a volunteer to the Fringe when you first got here 12 years ago, or
I wasn't.
Just, more so just a patron of it?
Patron, definitely, yeah. I wasn't much of a volunteer. I used to work for the symphony, and so I got my fill of arts performances 6 or 7 days a week as it was. So volunteering, I wanted to use my volunteer time in other avenues than sort of in the arts. So, but when I left the symphony and went into the private sector, I wanted to stay involved in the arts, and the board opportunity was the right time.
So what did you do for the symphony? What was your role at the symphony?
I was head of community relations, marketing, fund development, that type of stuff. Yeah.
Good. So you were kind of, did you have opportunities to engage? I guess you engaged with some marketing firms like Insight when you were with the symphony, and so you were at the other side of it. You were the actual company, or you were the actual
hiring
buyer
the talent,
of it, rather than selling it.
Yeah.
So what type of skill set did that give you in terms of understanding, how to make the pitch and how to develop those relationships that you're doing now?
Oh, it's interesting because going into, especially in the nonprofit environment, is that you need to be really conscious of, like when I go in to talk to a nonprofit client, potential nonprofit client now, it's being conscious of the fact that you have boards that might be heavily involved in buying decisions, or having multiple stakeholders that they need to go through. Working in a for-profit sector, you talk to a decision maker and the answer's done. Whereas in a nonprofit sector, you might talk to the executive director, but depending on how much money it is, they got to go and talk to this person and that person. So just understanding how to navigate the decision-making process in a nonprofit sector was something that I definitely learned because whenever we went to make a decision at the Symphony, there were definitely more stakeholders to take into account. And also understanding, sort of the outcomes of those too, because you're, in the nonprofit sector, you're spending, at the end of the day, you're spending donor dollars, so you want to make sure that they're getting the best, most amount of their money is going towards the mission of the organization. So, just understanding that you just, from a buying or pitching perspective, knowing that you just can't say, well, they're going to spend the money because they got to spend the money. There's more consideration behind it is really important.
So you talked about, Insight, in terms of the organization, how many people work there again? 15?
27.
27, okay. And so it's been growing over the last number of years.
Yeah.
Where do you see it going in the future? Is it primarily focused on Alberta, or is there some potential for going international with it?
Absolutely. I mean, one of our focuses at Insight is we use what we call the Net Promoter Score, and it's actually a referability index. So we want to become the most referable business-to-business marketing firm in Alberta. So what that means for us is having really deep-rooted community connections, really deep business connections. So we spend a lot of time as a firm really understanding who the movers and shakers are in business in this province. And so that's really kind of been our focus for right now, is that's our position as the Alberta marketplace. But we definitely, we've done work outside of Alberta. We do work in BC and Toronto. But the bulk of our work is there right now. But I think what we do is pretty unique, just understanding how to navigate centers of influence in terms of marketing. So there's lots of room to kind of grow from there. It's a question of timing right now more than anything else, and desire.
Right.
Yeah.
How's the economic situation here is starting to, I would think, be a little bit of a weighing factor. How do you see it in the next year or so?
It's a good question. Lesson number one, diversify. Diversify. So we have we have our nonprofit clients, but within our for-profit commercial side, we do work, we specialize in oil and gas and construction and professional services in the tech sector. And so when oil and gas hit the tank, we got a hit there, but that was a time when professional services, so your accounting firms, your law firms, your engineering firms, were starting to invest more because they wanted to hold on. So looking for the right types of clients that sort of see the market has really been key for us. So, I mean, we're feeling it like every company, but it's actually, we see it as a time for opportunity. You know, from a marketing perspective, a down market is the companies that really get that and don't put their heads in the sand, see it as an opportunity. Because even if you just hold your market share, some of your competitors are going to lose market share, so you come out ahead. So from that perspective, from our perspective, it's, you know, we're definitely cautious, but we're not running for the hills. But we do see, you know, a long-term anticipation. I mean, we hear from a lot of our clients that, and what we're seeing is that it's hard to make a long-term decision right now. It's going to be tough. But you know, I think what we saw the last time there was a downturn is that you get some pretty cool innovation that comes out with companies, and some really strong ideas come forward. So there's no easy answer to it. It's going to be a lot of wait and see.
In some ways, you know, when things are booming, there's a lot of fat, and you're not going to focus on the bottom line. And in times like this, you're more concerned about business practices and engineering the right things and making sure that, you know, your people are concentrating on the things that, you know, are the most important things. So it is a time when you can actually do a lot in terms of creating value.
Absolutely, yeah, and retaining your staff. I mean, keep your staff. You know, in the nonprofit sector right now, it's pour on the love. You know, even if your donors don't have a lot of money, but if there's donors who have been with you for a long time, will stay with you. Even through tough times, and in some cases will give you more during tough times. But right now is a time that even if you're not making a lot of money, it's not a reason to stop stewarding your donors and stewarding your staff. It's actually the time to pour on that love.
Is that something, you know, in terms of nonprofits or students that are studying business, that are trying to learn some things? I mean, they have value that nonprofits are looking at. How would they connect to a nonprofit and say, you know, I have these skills. We know that you don't have the money now, particularly when donors are you know, how would they do that? How would they get engaged with the nonprofits and say, you know, I've got some skills that you might be able to use that fit with, you know, achieving your objectives?
The best way to do it is the hardest way, and that's to sell yourself. You know, putting yourself out there and putting a good case forward for who you are and what you can present is key. And it doesn't come naturally to everybody. It's a muscle you got to kind of build and keep working out. But you know, looking for organizations that you're really passionate about is really key. And reaching out to them and saying, is there a way to be involved, either through some sort of lending some of the skills you have, through some volunteering. That's the classic way to do it. Going to events and learning about the industry and learning about the sector. So, you know, if you're interested in marketing and fundraising, you know, going to finding out when the networking events are for the fundraising professionals in town, and going to those and saying, I'm interested in getting into the field and getting into the industry. Like, I've got some skills to offer. You know, so sort of doing the traditional networking things. One thing that was really beneficial for me when I first moved to Alberta, since I didn't know anybody, was I found mentors. In the nonprofit sector, and even though they're still in the nonprofit sector and I'm not, they're still mentors to me. And so you can have a mentor that's not doing necessarily the same thing that you are, but people that sort of share the same value can really kind of paint out what the possibilities are.
On a similar note, we have a student that asked if you have any thoughts about how they might be able to market themselves after graduation or during, you know, how do you provide. How do you get your name out? How do you get your skills out? What's the best way of doing that in this busy, very noisy world?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'd sort of say there's sort of three buckets of networking type activities that you can do, and I think those have sort of formed the basis for when I moved here to Edmonton, in terms of how I sort of built up my network here in town. And one is your friend, your social networking. So whether that's your friends, it's the nonprofits, it's the community, it's things you volunteer in. That's sort of a certain type of networking. It's very much around building people who get to know you, and you know, it's this people that are sort of in your same age, maybe not from your class, but have sort of all been through the same life arc to this point. Those are the people that 10 years down the road know where you've come from. They've shared the same sort of trials and tribulations, and so recognizing that group is really important. Your second bucket, I've always sort of looked at as kind of like your professional bucket. So that's your industry peers. So let's say you finish school and you get a job in marketing for a car dealership. So who else is out there doing marketing? Those are your industry peers. Who else there in the car dealership world? I think that sort of all those people that are kind of have a connection there. Those are the people that over time become great job referrals. They become great connections for potential, if you're trying to land a contract, that type of thing. So that's sort of the second bucket for me. Mm-hmm. And then the third bucket is really what I call the centers of influence bucket. And that's let's say you want to work in the construction industry after you finish this. You want to be in business in the construction industry. So where do the people from the construction industry hang out? So they have the Edmonton Construction Association, which is kind of where they all go to make their buying decisions and where they learn about who to hire and all that type of thing. So recognizing sort of the centers of influence around the industries or the types of companies that you want to work with is a great place to start to go and check out those networking events, because those are the ones that lead you up eventually to kind of that industry. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of the networking thing. Having a strong profile, having a really good brand is really important. Be careful what you say on social media. Those types of things really do weigh into how you market yourself going forward. So having a strong sort of outer veneer is really key, and then being open to those opportunities.
What type of things, when you're looking to hire somebody, what are the things that you look for in a prospective employee?
Personally, myself, partly being in marketing, but also just based on my personal values, I'm actually looking for somebody who can present all the soft skills first.
So in soft skills, you're talking about which areas?
Can look you eye in the eye, pleasant, easy to engage with, comfortable to talk to, those types of things. You might hear just sort of like good EQ, emotional qualities. Mm-hmm. Those are the things you can't teach somebody. Somebody who's going to be a D-bag is going to be a D-bag is going to be a D-bag, right? So I want to work with people who I can get excited about with and want to work with and get more engaged and have these great ideas and great conversations with. You can teach somebody how to do a media buy. You can teach somebody how to do social media, mm-hmm. but you can't teach them to be a D-bag in social media. Right. So it's really important from that front to me to look at those people that are going to represent me as an individual who's hiring them, represent the company that I work for, make me feel proud, somebody that I see has a lot of potential that can grow. Mm-hmm. Those are the things that I really look for.
Okay. For some reason, I just thought of Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. As you were talking.
I wouldn't hire him.
What's that?
I wouldn't hire him.
You wouldn't hire him. But if you were to try to work with him, mm-hmm. I think what would be the major challenge?
So here's the interesting thing about Donald Trump. He's owned a narrative. When you talk about marketing and communications, he told the different story. Every other politician sounds like every other politician. He came out and broke the narrative, owned his narrative, and you're seeing the payback. Mm-hmm. So there is value in recognizing what you do that's different and unique and special, and emphasizing that in all that you do that makes people attracted to you. Now, in Donald Trump's version, it's attracted to him for the wrong reasons. But he's owned a narrative, so I'll give him that. Now, how do you work with that? I don't know. Stroke his ego as much as possible. Okay. Would be my guess. I think he kind of got I suspect he's one of these guys that, the fact that he flip-flops so much, I think you always have to have a plan B. Right. Forever, however you would deal with him.
Plausible deniability.
Absolutely,
in terms of setting something for him.
Confidentiality, absolutely,
right. Yeah. He would be a guy that has a brand. I mean, he has, the Trump name is a brand, and whether he's successful or not, there's a perception in the market of the brand. So he's a skilled huckster maybe, or something like that. But where do you think, why do people buy into that?
There's a lot to be said for confidence. And this is true whether you're Donald Trump or you're somebody trying to get a job. People are drawn to confidence. People are drawn to charisma. there's nothing more detrimental when you're in a sales moment. And so that could be anything from a first date to a job interview to a media thing than to not be confident. And I'm sure if you've been on a first date that has not gone well, there's probably not a lot of confidence in there. And so there's something about his confidence, and I mean, you think back to, when he was selling Trump steaks and saying they're the best steaks in the world. I mean, obviously not, but he was pretty convinced of it, and he delivers it in a way that's very convincing and very compelling. And it's hard not to, when somebody's that convinced of something, it's hard not to disagree to a certain extent. So, I mean, that's definitely something that he's done well, despite the fact that, half of what he's done has actually been a failure. We forget that because of the successes, because he's been so confident. The other part of it is that he tries and tries and tries again. And that's something that, it's very easy to just to get knocked down once and never get up again. And so people who can do that garner a lot of respect and a lot of attention.
Yeah. Who else, if you take a look at the landscape in Canada or the US, who has a great message and they know what they're trying to get across and how to do it? It could be organizations or it could be individuals.
When I think about a brand that's trying to get a story across, I'm actually a big fan of ATVs. I think they've done a really great job. They have a very clear vision of how they think the banking can be different. Okay. And that's resonated with me quite a bit. And they use it in all of their channels. Putting Dave Mowat on in front of everything as their president is, it's not innovative, but it's quite authentic with him. Brands and messages need to be absolutely authentic. So that's been great. I was really, really impressed with, regardless of whatever you think about politics, I was really impressed with how the Liberals handled their message in the last federal campaign. They went from being in a position at the start of the campaign where they were seen as almost being bumbling and ill-prepared and ill-equipped, and they actually used that as momentum towards building what they built, and they peaked at the right time. So from getting a message across, capturing a sentiment and an idea at a time when the country was getting really frustrated, they did a fantastic job with it. Now the challenge for them is for the next 4 years is to deliver on that. And that's the challenge in politics all the time. But I thought they did a remarkable job in terms of capturing a sentiment and a message and pushing it forward.
Right.
And partnering it with an individual brand like Justin.
Right. Yeah. So how do you think, we've heard of the Justin brand, and he's currently in the U.S. He did 60 Minutes last night. Where does the brand end and the real, the work begin? How much does a brand get you, and when do you know when to stop providing things that are just more of the
the surface
and then
piece,
where does that end? How if you were working with somebody like Justin Trudeau, what are the danger signs that you would caution them to?
Authenticity is number one. People see through veneer pretty quick, and so if you are portrayed as being accessible and likable and fun-loving, then you need to always be accessible, likable, and fun-loving. It's got to be who you are. So the moment that Justin stops being accessible to the media, stops showing up and doing his selfies, and all of those things are the moment when his brand starts to break down. Okay. So the challenge that I see for him is that he's set up a highly accessible brand. And as he gets busier and more pulled into more and more things over the course of the next few years, that's going to be harder to manage. So it's a question of how does he convey it, because that's going to have to change. Yeah. So that's a big thing about it, is that authenticity piece. I think the other piece around brand is, and we deal with this in companies all the time when we talk about companies' brand, are the suite of experiences that you offer consistent across everything and the best they can possibly be. So whether that's an individual or a company, it's like going to a restaurant. It could have the coolest name, the most beautifully designed restaurant, stellar design menus, incredible food, but if the server is terrible and is mean and dismissive, it doesn't matter about the rest of it. Your experience has been ruined. And the reality with brand is that you don't own your brand. Everybody else owns your brand because it's a perception. And so, you can come out with the best laid plans, but if you don't deliver on them all the way through at a consistent level, then you're in trouble.
I have a couple more questions for you from the students. So we have a student that's currently interested in pursuing a career in consumer psychology and just looking into branding. Do you have any tips on how to get into careers in these areas and what you can do in university to assist the process?
Consumer psychology. Interesting. Talk to Leo Wong.
Okay. So
he's your guy.
He's your guy? Okay,
yeah.
Good.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of branding, I mean, I guess the big thing around branding is recognizing that branding isn't a means unto itself. So branding isn't a logo. Branding isn't a name. It's understanding a suite of experiences that you provide, visual, auditory, physical, everything about it. So, people who want to get into that, sort of really understanding that brand piece, take a lot of time and effort to look at companies and really analyze how they deliver their message across multiple medium. I think that's a really key one. That'll help really give you a good sense as to who's doing it well. Branding it's a function of marketing. So, marketing helps to sort of convey the brand. So if you really want to be into that branding side of things, then definitely connecting with an organization like ACE, which is the Advertising Club of Edmonton, is a pretty cool one. It's pretty young. It's a lot of the ad agencies in town, and there's ad agencies, that are 30, 40 people. There are ad agencies that are 2 or 3 people. It's a really hyper-connected community. They love to network. They love to be social. They have a student membership. Great entry point into meeting people who do a lot of branding, either from a visual communication standpoint or from a strategy side. So I'd say that's a great avenue here in town.
We have another student that was asking if, what about summer internships? Are they an advantage? So they're looking at 2 marketing internships before I graduate. Will they actually help, or is it more important to focus on school?
You're talking to a guy who was not a very good student.
Or is it a balance, really?
It's a balance. So, okay, full disclosure, I also teach here at MacEwan out of the West End campus. So I tell my students there, getting that real world experience is really key. There's a subtlety to understanding a business environment, how to understand those human dynamics, understanding what you learn today and actually how it applies. That is really, really key. And if you can come out with, again, if you can come out of school having a bit of work experience and the academic knowledge, you have that confidence walking into those job interviews going like, yeah, I can do that because I've done it. Like I am already there for you. So it conveys that confidence and that ability to kind of step into that environment, understanding what you're walking into. So I'm a big proponent for it.
Does Insight typically take on anybody? It's a question that one of our students had.
Here's the sales pitch. I like it. I love it. Whoever had that question.
Yeah. So do they hire for summer or and short-term positions?
We do it on a case-by-case basis. We don't have a regular habit of it. And part of that has just sort of been always our structure and how we've structured our organization. That said, there is absolutely no harm ever in approaching an organization you want to work with and saying, hey, I have been researching your company and I would love to do some work with you in some way capacity. So you never know what those types of networking opportunities do for you, so reaching out. And I would say do it in the personal way. Don't just send in a resume saying, hope we hire you, but walk in and see if there's an opportunity to talk to somebody. It doesn't mean you're not going to, doesn't mean that you're going to always get somebody who's going to be willing to sit down with you, but you never know. And so, I'm happy to talk with somebody if they want to. Again, we don't necessarily always have a place, but I'm happy to hear your story, and maybe I know somebody who does.
Yeah. How about job shadowing? Any opportunities there to see what, if they came in for like a day, what would it be like? Get an idea of what you do and.
Yeah. We've done that for students before, for sure. ACE, the Advertising Club of Edmonton, they actually, I think they might have a chapter here on campus, and they actually do a job shadowing day where you can go with a group of people and kind of go to different agencies and learn. So again, from a student perspective, it's a cool one to do, but we've definitely had students reach out and say, can I come and hang out for an afternoon or something like that? It's not, people think that sort of marketing agencies and that type of thing are really like madmenish, and they're not.
And I think we have a couple of questions that, or commentaries that our students are having is, the idea that when you were talking about soft skills and being able to present yourself and get your ideas out, the idea that you might be an extrovert. Is that traditionally the person that succeeds in marketing, or is somebody that's more introverted? Is that, are there different roles and different things that they might be doing that an introverted person versus an extroverted person may be, more successful at?
Yeah, that's a great question. So on the introvert to extrovert scale, I'm way on the introvert side. Way on the introvert side. So I think the first thing to do is to recognize what introvert versus extrovert means. Introvert means that you need to recharge. You need downtime away from people to recharge. It doesn't mean you don't like to talk to people. It doesn't mean you sit in the corner while everybody else is out there. I can go to an event for 5 hours and have a great time and chat with all kinds of people, but then I need to go home and just relax and put on House of Cards or something like that. Whereas an extrovert would be like, let's go to the next party. Right. So that's the difference. So recognizing that it's not a question of whether you're an introvert or an extrovert in that sense. There are definitely jobs in every business sector that are more people who can't be upfront, face-to-face in front of people all the time. And so, like strategy, for instance, so that's kind of where I'm at, is great for introverts because you engage with people, you facilitate sessions, you work with a client, and you come back and you process what you've learned and you get it out and you've got your own time to do it. Even designers, people like graphic designers tend to be like these like really outgoing people and all that stuff. And some of the best graphic designers I've ever met are super introverts. They love to like sit down and say, okay, I'm gonna come up with an idea, and then they just sit down by themselves with their headphones on and go. So it really depends. You can kind of carve out your own niche based on what it is that, knowing your strengths. If you are an introvert, what does that mean? How do you turn that into a strength for you? And there's lots of work out there, lots of studies about that. But don't just sort of assume if you are an introvert that means you're not fit for something. It just means you maybe need to have to structure or strategize how you approach something a little bit differently.
Okay, great. Okay, well, that's a great piece of advice to end our little discussion. So it's been a great hour. Thank you again for coming in and talking to our NextUp.
Great.
Good.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.